I'll be hosting a discussion with people who represent the voices of a growing alternative. We'll be talking about anarchism, philosophies gaining momentum as more and more people are becoming disillusioned with the status quo. So to talk about everything from the role of government to an ideal society, I'm joined now by a brilliant panel and breaking the set's first ever Alternative Voices debate, starting with Scott Crow, author of Black Flags and Windmills and founder of the Anarchist Common Ground Collective. I wanted you to briefly outline your political ideologies in about a minute's time. Scott, when people think of anarchism, they think total chaos. Can you break down that misconception for us?
It's a misconception. Anarchy is a living and dynamic framework based in ideas of cooperation, where we can all get along to make the world better for each other. We call it mutual aid. The ideas of direct action, that we don't have to wait on others, that we are more than voters, we are more than consumers, there are other paths that we should take, and we don't need to wait on others to do it. We start to do it ourselves, and we do it in our communities. The ideas there's a myriad of collective liberation, that we're all tied in this together, that I don't want to do better on the back of somebody else, and I don't want somebody to do better on the back of me, that again, we're in this together. And these ideas have a long, over 100-year tradition of libertarianism, but it's social libertarianism, where it's the better for all of us. And it's also anti-capitalist. And I think that that's a really important distinction to make, because capitalism has been exploitative, capitalism has been oppressive to communities all over the planet, and to an extraction of resources and destroyed the earth along the way.
And let's take a look at some domestic issues going on right now. Right now, 46.2 million people are living below the poverty line in this country. On top of that, of 25 cities surveyed, 21 have seen an increase in homelessness. And finally, despite Obama's job numbers report, only about 60% of American adults are working, which means 40% aren't. And Scott, I'm sure you'd take a different approach.
Sure, I agree with the self-reliance, but I don't, not individual self-reliance. I think we need to take government out of the picture, but I also say we need to take multinational corporations out of the picture also, because there is no real free market in this country. You have basically private profits, but subsidized risk, and we don't talk about that when we talk about free markets. But what I want to do is take the long term. It took hundreds of years for us to build up to the power dynamics that we have today, and what I want to do is unwind all of those. That we don't rely on governments, and we don't rely on corporations to do all these things, and that we start to build and exercise power from below. And that is localized economies built on solidarity and mutual aid, where people, instead of relying on governments for handouts, that they start to work on food security themselves, create community gardens, create victory gardens, create community-supported agriculture, these small-scale things, creating our own healthcare. If there's a nationalized healthcare, fine, but we need localized healthcare, because there's people who still fall through that net for real. All of these things, we start to rebuild the infrastructure in civil society outside of multinational corporations and governments.
And Scott, do you have anything to add? What would an anarchist society do with the banking system that we see right now?
I don't want a kinder, gentler capitalism. I don't want a kinder, gentler government. I don't want either of them. We don't need either of them. And multinational corporations are an aberration of small business, and they should not even exist. There is always, there's concentrated wealth. No one can make a decision about that. There's no free economies. There's no free market. That's all pipe dream stuff. And so again, what I'm talking about is localized economies, bringing it back where people can be face-to-face make decisions, where people in bioregions can make decisions about the resources. You know, there are monopolies. ExxonMobil has a monopoly. They own upstream and downstream all the oil that touches anybody in this planet. And whether in a free market or with governments, it's like, I don't want a kinder, gentler ExxonMobil. I don't want ExxonMobil.
Scott, under anarchism, would there be a constitution at all? How would people's rights be protected? And what would the role of the police look like, if any?
Well, in the short term and long term, right? So the short term is there'd be transitional parts where people set up their own constitutions and their localized economies as we dismantle this larger system. And in the long term, that maybe some people want to organize around that, like they did in Spain in 1930s, or maybe they don't. Maybe we're like indigenous cultures, just have it by word of mouth and family and culture. I mean, that's for communities to decide themselves. But the thing is, we don't need those pieces. We don't need the force of the state, the threat of use of force to back capital in any way. And that, I think, dismantling is important. And when you talk about Patriot Act, I mean, as somebody who's been a victim of the Patriot Act, I was listed as a domestic terrorist and under investigation for 10 years, although I was never charged with anything. I am definitely against omnibus bills like that, where just everybody comes to the trough and gets to sell everything. The war on terror is a sham, and what it's done is it's criminalized dissent in this country, and that's had a chilling effect on things. The second thing is that it's created this false war on the Muslim communities and people of Middle Eastern descent, as well as political dissent in this country. country.
And what about the police? Who would police society?
Well, I could tell you what we did after New Orleans was we policed ourselves. We took up arms in armed self-defense because I'm an advocate of armed self-defense, and that we said that we will do ourselves because we cannot rely on the police because they were trying to kill us, and that we would try to do it in the best way that we could with the communities that we are there. And we had to deal with sexual assault. We had to deal with white militias trying to kill black people in communities very seriously, taking a long history from social justice activists who had come before us and movements who had come before us who had also done the same thing. And I say that we have to have community control. We must break this down, that we must know who our neighbors are, and I don't like the word policing, but take care of ourselves, self-determination for each of the communities.
And let's talk about foreign policy in general. Right now we're hearing a lot of strong rhetoric coming from the political and media establishment about Iran, Syria, and most recently North Korea. I wanted to play a quick soundbite from that.
The U.S. is tracking a mobile missile launcher that has been moved within North Korea by train. The launcher has the ability to strike Japan as well as U.S. bases in Okinawa and Guam. Adding to the fears, today, the young leader of the North said the moment of explosion is coming.
So, Scott, under an anarchist state, or I guess not state, but under an anarchist system, how would these kind of threats be dealt with? I guess dovetailing off of what Eugene just said, would you go kind of more that route of just community cooperation, not the eye for the eye type thing?
Well, the long-term thing is that historically nation states are new to this planet and they haven't worked, and that we would dismantle them. We would take down false borders. I think that we'd also dismantle the military-industrial complex. We'd just start taking it away because we don't need it. If we're not an imperialist force who is actually trying to draw resources, labor, and the natural world from other places, then we don't need it. And if we put in systems of federations where people can actually federate by voluntary association and exchange resources how they want, that's fine. But what I want to do is break it down. We've built these huge systems and we need to break them down. Now that doesn't get rid of the nukes immediately, but we start to dismantle these systems bit by bit. Again, we've built this stuff for hundreds of years. We need to unwind it. But we have to ask the question first, why is it like that?